Welcome to the Intentional Household Podcast. Today, we're talking about how to be a financially intentional family. So today we are talking about something that many families avoid, but desperately need. And it is creating a household financial plan that not only helps the parents, but helps to teach kids about managing their own money and managing their money with intention. So our guest today is Adam Rivers from Rivers Wealth. Adam, do you want to do a little introduction about yourself?
It's nice to be here. So Rivers Wealth, I can tell you a bit about my background. I actually started my career in investment banking and mergers and acquisitions. And following that, I transitioned into the institutional portfolio management world. So I spent 12 years there, most recently as a lead portfolio manager on a Canadian equity fund. So yeah, after working in the institutional side of the business for a while, I decided to make a shift to the private wealth side, wanting to actually work directly with families, helping them with their investment journey, as well as on the financial planning side.
So Adam, you worked in the corporate world and then you shifted to working with households and families. I'd love to know what inspired the shift.
I mean, really, it comes back to wanting to be in service and actually more directly helping people. So as far as just finding better alignment with my own personal values. So 12 years working as an institutional portfolio manager, the incentives and the work are really kind of geared towards, I was very focused on outperforming a benchmark, outperforming peers, by X amount of basis points or percentages a year, picking stocks, doing research. I enjoyed it. I'm an intellectually curious person, but it kind of hit a point where I didn't feel like I was getting the feedback loop on doing good work and actually helping people. So the opportunity presented itself to make this shift, and already finding a lot more kind of gratification and actually seeing the impact of my work and improving people's lives, reducing their stress. So yeah, that's where we are now.
And I think that we should note that you are a dad yourself and you do have 3 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So how you run your household in terms of finances, I can imagine that you are inspired to do that for other families as well, just having that personal experience.
Yeah, no, definitely. Definitely. Like, you hit a point where you start to realize, reflect, you've been through quite a few transitions in life and even just speaking and, within my own network, as you kind of get on and your kids get older, there's a lot of ups and downs and turns, and having someone there to kind of guide you, see around corners for you, what you can expect from a budgeting standpoint, from a saving perspective, from an overall financial planning perspective, I think is really helpful.
So how do you define financial intentionality and what does that look like to you?
Well, if you bring it back to the basics of, how much am I spending as a household? How much am I saving? Financial decisions that are going to have longer term implications. I think it's really about, if you're thinking about a family, a household, it's not an individual. It's getting together, having those touch points. If you think about, with your spouse or your partner early in a relationship and throughout your relationship, checking in to get aligned on what you want to allocate, your budget to, your spending to. How do you want to design your financial life or your financial situation, spending, so that it's aligned with your values? And it really comes down to getting intentional with, what gives you utility. I think a lot of people, and there's a common phrase like keeping up with the Joneses, but looking and comparing, and that the term of comparison's the thief of joy. It really can be, right? So we're all different. We all have different experiences. We had different upbringings. We grew up in different households, different financial situations, which will really frame how we approach that side of our lives. So you can't look at someone like, wow, they're doing this. Like, should I be doing this? Well, they clearly draw a lot of value from purchasing really expensive cars. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're not a car person. So, don't worry about that. And what do you get utility from?
Yeah. And focus your own energy on yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
And because you really don't know what's going on behind the scenes and what their finances are like either.
No.
I think when we're talking about budgeting, it feels very restrictive to me. And I imagine many individuals feel that way. So, how can you almost reframe this so that it's empowering to families to have a budget and to follow it?
I think the empowering part comes from clarity,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're driving blind, that's not very empowering, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can't see what this means or what is this spending okay? Am I okay?
Mm-hmm.
Talking with clients, families, couples, it's surprising to me how few have a good grasp of how much they spend,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And what comes out of that is they're not sure if they're okay.
Yeah. I believe that.
Right.
And I feel that.
So there's a lot of like, am I okay? Is this okay?
Uh-huh.
And then I'll say, well, do you have an understanding of how much you spend in a year versus how much you're bringing in? Like those are very important numbers, right? Like foundational numbers.
Yes.
And they have no idea. So of course they're not going to know if they're okay or not, right? So going back to the empowerment, I think it's the clarity.
Okay.
So, I mean, call it what you want, a spending plan versus budget. Budget seems not the right word or not as empowering of a word.
So almost reframing it, I suppose, so that, I mean, maybe if it was just a different word beyond budgeting, maybe I wouldn't feel so scared and overwhelmed.
Yeah. Budgeting, I think, draws the idea of like cutting costs.
Yes.
Like
that's where my mind goes to.
Right. Versus a spending plan where it's like, let's sit down. Let's make sure what we're spending is being allocated most efficiently, optimally, so that we're getting the most utility out of our spending, right? As a family.
So for anyone who wanted to get started, and for those who are feeling overwhelmed, what is a good starting place? What are some good building blocks for creating a family budget?
Yeah. So again, like when I'm working with clients, there's two pieces of what I do. First of all, and we didn't really touch on that. There's the investing piece, which really draws from my expertise. And then there's the financial planning piece. So holistic financial planning is the other piece aside from the investment management. And on the financial planning side, as we kind of approach, okay, let's build a financial plan. The first piece and the foundation of any financial plan is, as a family, how much are you spending in a year? Because everything is going to draw from that, right? What's the surplus? How much are you saving? Everything's going to come out of that. So really like to break down a budget into two segments, right? So there's your recurring fixed costs. Those are easy to measure, right? Okay. So your mortgage, your rent costs, a car payment.
Yeah. Easy to grab those numbers.
Easy to grab those numbers. And you know, the same every month. The trickier ones are the more discretionary numbers and the ones that kind of flex month to month. So, you know, entertainment.
Yeah.
How much are you spending on entertainment, right? Those are tricky to track. Clothes, how much you spend on clothes, how much you spend on gas. Like these are numbers people don't have on the tip of their tongue, right? And then there's the elements of the big lumpy items through the year, right? So if you're thinking about a family, you're a household that has two young children that are, 2 and 3, you have big daycare costs, but those are going to transition. They go to kindergarten, but there's new ones that are going to backfill that, right? So camps, right? And more activities. They can play competitive sports. How competitive, right? You don't really know, but you can try to get an idea of what that looks like. And so those harder to track ones, like the entertainment, the gas, the clothes, it's helpful to have, I've started to use with my clients, and we use personally with our family, is Monarch Money is the name of it. So
is that an app?
So it's a expense tracking software. It's like $100 a year to subscribe to it. And you can link up all your household credit cards, bank accounts.
Okay, that's what I need.
So you're seeing everything because a lot of times it's difficult to see your partners. And so if you guys are okay with that, you bring everything together and you can track your spending and you can put it into buckets and you can allocate it to different buckets how you want. You can set a budget, see how it's tracking. It'll look at historical spending for those segments.
Okay.
And you can get quite granular with the different segments.
Okay. So that is step one,
That's
just
step one.
tracking all of your spending.
Yeah.
Because then I'd want to know, okay, I've tracked it all. Now what's next? Like, how do I determine what I should be cutting? Because that is how I would be viewing it, what I need to cut. I don't even know how to proceed next.
Again, it's not a static thing.
Okay.
So they're going to have, well, how much did we spend in the last 12 months?
Mm-hmm.
How much do we think what's going to change? How much do we spend? Is that reasonable? And it's a conversation, right?
Okay.
You need to have. And having a more clear picture, this is the buckets that we spent on.
Well, and I guess,
how do we want to make adjustments? Maybe you don't. That's fine. But at least you're comfortable. Like when I'm spending this amount on this, well, that's been allocated for. So that's fine. Like I don't need to stress about it.
Yeah.
Like that's reasonable.
But I suppose there are a lot of families who are in debt. And so they would use that tracking to help identify how they can pay off that debt a little faster or just pay it off in general.
Of course. So like every situation's different. So that's where like rules of thumb can be quite tricky. I'm not actually a huge fan of rules of thumb because everyone's playing with a different set of cards, right? So we need to look at that, assess your individual situation. And that's where goals come in, right? So I talked about like the budget is one piece, but a big part of the financial plan is your goals, right? What is your family's goals? So is that to retire at X age and X number of years? Is it to save up for something? Is it to reduce your debt because that's causing you stress? So everyone's goals are going to be slightly different. So it's getting those goals down and then setting a plan in place. So if it is a situation where we do want to have more of a surplus to be able to save for X goal or to pay down debt, which may be the goal, then you're gonna go line by line and be like, what can we do to try to get that surplus?
So I would say in our family or in our household, Alex is the one responsible for managing our finances. He has the goals, the long-term goals in place that he has set for the household. They aren't always communicated to us, but he is the one tracking everything. Is there anything that households can do so that it's not all on one person, and anything I can do to help take the load off of him and then also be more in tune with our own finances?
This might be a bit self-serving, but it really is bringing a third party, I think, a neutral third party into the fold to just have those planned sit-down meetings. And, a lot of times I think working with clients, they're going to come up with the answer themselves, but they need a facilitator. Someone to ask the right questions and provide feedback and make sure both parties are in the fold. One item I want to touch on the planning side is, and it goes back to bringing in a third party as well, is there is a coaching element, right? To having a financial advisor, which I know you're big on. Right? So accountability. There's a lot of things that like about financial planning that are not exciting, particularly as we look further out, and you may not even want to have to talk about them, right? They're kind of uncomfortable. So we're thinking about insurance, if we're thinking about potentially, premature death or illness. These are realities as we get on in life, that these things could happen and there needs to be plans in place. So if one partner, and this happens a lot, and I mean, it's a similar situation in our household, is one person generally gravitates towards managing the financial situation. Another partner may not be as interested and be like, fine, you just deal with it because I don't want to have that. Right. But it is important to have both on the same page in the mix, at least understand, and to have a third party person in there in case something does happen to the person that is controlling everything. And then it can be a little less stressful if something was to happen. Right?
Yeah, that's my motivator, actually, because I always fear if something were to happen to Alex, I would have no idea about our finances. And there may be various accounts that I should know about, but don't know about. So, okay, that makes sense. Having that third party even if I'm not in tune with everything, that third party is in tune with it and can help me if something were to happen.
Exactly. I mean, that if something was to happen,
Mm-hmm.
that would be an immediate meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
To go over everything, and you can focus on things that matter in that situation, like your family, your kids.
Yep. Yes.
And having peace of mind that things are in order, things are okay. Someone's paying attention to that part
Yep.
of things.
So we have talked about kind of big picture if we wanted to do long-term planning, but how would we, if I have short-term needs and goals and spending, like kids' clothing, for example, how do I balance that and fit it in with the long-term goals?
Well, again, that's one element of your budget, right? So again, it's a conversation as a family. How much do you want to allocate of your budget to clothes? How important is it?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Essential.
Essential. And financial advisors shouldn't be saying, wow, you should be only spending this. There is no
Mm-hmm.
rules of thumb. That's the individual to decide, right? Okay. Some people get a lot of value on
clothing,
right? And that's fine of it being a certain quality and having a certain amount of options. And if it's reasonable and fits in and doesn't conflict with other goals and it brings you joy and utility, then that's fine. But it's having a meeting, discussing that, being like, yes, this is something, acknowledging this brings me a lot of joy and it doesn't conflict with other goals.
Okay.
And then so when you make those spending decisions and you buy the clothes, you don't have to feel guilty about it, right?
Mm-hmm. So, we've been kind of throwing some of these terms around: financial advisor, financial planner, and then there's certainly also the accountant and there's bookkeepers. And I think that it can get very confusing because I don't know what the difference is between what some of those services are, especially between a financial planner, financial advisor. Are they the same? Are they different? And how do I know what I need?
Okay. So, I mean, this is one issue I have and actually is a motivator for me is the financial service industry in Canada versus other regions as well, because I've looked at those, is quite complicated, right? There's a lot of different titles. There's even looking at a financial advisor, there's so many different credentials.
Mm-hmm.
Some mean a lot, some are pretty worthless. And so it can be quite misleading. Because of it, it's so complicated, I feel like a lot of times people don't know their options and then so they don't do anything because they don't even know who to reach out to.
No, they don't. And maybe they're using someone who's referred by a friend or a family member.
Sure.
Yep.
So there is financial advisors. Many financial advisors also do financial planning, but they also will manage the investment piece of the financial plan, which is a large piece. And generally financial advisors are compensated, or their price for their services is paid through a percentage of the assets that they manage.
Okay.
And that the financial planning comes with that.
Okay, got it.
As part of that price.
Okay.
There's also a segment of financial planners that are advice-only financial planning. So they charge a fee for their financial planning. They don't manage investments. So they will provide advice. They might do a risk profile for a client, and they might come up with, a targeted allocation for the investment portfolio, but then they will refer that client to a lot of times a portfolio manager. And so they're going to charge a fixed amount, maybe to get a one-time financial plan done for you. It might be $2,000 to $3,000.
Okay.
Right. But then there's also going to be the investment piece. But there's a lot of DIY investors out there, right? Or maybe their situation that a lot of their assets are in defined contribution employer plans and they're fine with that and they don't, or they're happy to do a bit of DIY investing themselves, but they want a financial plan.
Okay.
They want to get an idea of retirement. Are they ready for retirement?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're 10 years out, 5 years out. So they could go to someone, pay $2,000 to $3,000, get a robust financial plan and get better clarity that way. from a financial advisor perspective, there's different buckets of financial advisors, right? So there are different levels of registration. There's regulatory bodies that oversee the financial advice industry in Canada. And, there's levels where the barriers to entry to becoming a financial advisor are very low. So there's financial advisors that are licensed to only be able to sell mutual funds, so invest in mutual funds for their clients. These often carry higher fees. And then there are securities regulated financial advisors. So it's a higher level of registration where they can invest in individual securities. And so they have more options. And then there's kind of a subsegment of that securities license group called portfolio managers, which I would fall into, just given my expertise on the investment side. So portfolio managers generally, just from my perspective, like I have a CFA, more robust investment experience, and we can run kind of fully discretionary managed accounts, meaning you work with a portfolio manager, you decide on how your allocation is going to be. And, that portfolio manager will communicate how they're going to invest for you, but then it's hands off from there. And you're giving the trust to that portfolio manager to manage your assets based on how you discussed they would be.
Okay.
But they don't need sign off of every decision. And then with that group, there's also a larger kind of spectrum of investments that they can invest clients in, which is an area of focus for my practice as well. So there's a segment of financial advisors, and so their principal business is going to be selling insurance, but they also offer investment advice. So if you think Sun Life, Canada Life, Manulife, they have financial advisors, right? That work under their umbrella. And really it's like they lead with insurance, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of their core business. Yeah. And then they're going to have the investment piece, which is most usually going to be mutual funds.
Okay, got it.
So Laura, you can conclude that there is a lot of options, a lot of very different options when you're seeking financial advice. So it really is important to be doing your research. It's one of those things where you talk to your friends and family. Referrals are always good, but you need to seek out different types of financial advisors. So a lot of people will go to the path of least resistance, right? As they're starting out. So what does that usually mean? It usually means they go to the places where, there's been the largest marketing budget. So if you think the big banks are the easiest, go to your bank branch, right? So you start there and you get worked through the bank system. Or there's the robo-advisors, right? So if you're thinking about Wealthsimple, great advertising, great marketing, it's compelling, lower fees, great place to start, right? If you're in your 20s and, you saved up $10,000 and you don't know what to do with it, that's a great place to start, right? But you need to realize as you get on and your career evolves and you start accumulating, let's call it more material savings.
It can get very complicated.
It can get complicated, and you probably deserve more than a basic option.
Okay.
All right. So really go out. Don't rush in that into choosing. If you're currently, with a bank, you're fine. Or if you're currently with a robo-advisor, start to do some research. Is there other options for me? I mean, that's the biggest thing. Know what your options are. I think people in general underestimate how many options they have, right? To their own detriment.
Yeah, they don't know their options. They don't know where to start. And the other thing is when friends or family refer someone who they're working with, the thing is that person might not actually meet your own needs because you have your own portfolio or assets that could differ from your friends and family.
So this is that's a really good point. If you're thinking about younger families, a lot of people I know might be by default, they made the right decision. Let's bring in a third party. Let's work with a financial advisor. And they talk to their mom and dad, their in-laws, who they're working with.
Yes.
So now all of a sudden they're working with their parents' advisor. So this individual might be a couple of years away from retirement.
Yeah.
They might have very different values and have had a very different financial experience, operating in a very different financial world.
Good point.
Than a younger demographic is. So are they going to be able to relate to you? Is there going to be a fit there? do you guys speak the same language, right? And I think there can be friction when you come into those situations. So
Okay.
it's finding the right time to, okay, let me find my guy or girl, right?
Yeah.
That fits with my family, right?
That's such a great point. I mean, I'm just thinking about when I was looking for a personal trainer, I wanted a female who was around my age. And at the time, I wanted a mom because she understood what a postpartum body is like. But if I was looking for someone to support our family and our finances, then someone like you, who is in the same stage of life and with kids, would completely get it. Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay. I'm just thinking about any families or households who are shopping around for an individual to support them. What are some screening questions or things they should be looking for that are red flags or things that would be in their favor?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, there's a long list of questions that, I'd be happy to provide when you're screening for financial advisors. A big one, a couple elements, is you want to get an understanding are how independent are they?
Okay.
Right? How independent are their decisions from potentially conflicts?
Okay.
Right? That's very important. And a lot of that will depend on who they work with, who they work for. But a good one to get to the heart of that is ask if they're a fiduciary.
And
right?
can you tell us what that means?
Of course. So if you think about lawyers, they're fiduciaries. If you think about doctors, they're fiduciaries. General definition would be that they're legally bound to act in their client, your best interest, and that their decisions should always be bound by that.
Okay.
The majority of financial advisors in Canada are not fiduciaries.
Oh, wow.
By definition.
Okay. I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn that.
Absolutely. So if you were to walk into a bank branch and there's, a financial advisor at the bank branch, the bank teller knows like, oh, you have some money that you're not investing. Go talk to a financial advisor there. They are not a fiduciary, right? They are then likely going to put you in some mutual funds, likely that bank's mutual funds, which is a conflict in itself, but it's fine because it meets a suitability bar.
Okay.
Right. So they can defend that these are suitable investments for this. They may not be the best investments for this client. There might be ones that have outperformed this fund on every metric, but it's still suitable. It's a much lower bar, right?
Yeah. So they need to sell certain products.
Yeah.
Or push certain products. And those products may not be in my best interest.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, so it's a general situation where does your financial advisor work with an investment dealer that also has an asset management arm and actually also has, let's say mutual funds, right? Okay.
Let's shift gears now and talk about being financially savvy and learning about money. 84% of Canadians say that learning about money at school would have reduced their current stress. So why do you think they aren't learning about that in school? And what can we as parents do to help fill that gap?
Well, the first part of that, I mean, that's a curriculum issue and that should be corrected. And hopefully it does, right? But parents definitely shouldn't bank on that. So they should definitely be taking that into their own hands at home. So obviously at different ages of your children, you're going to be, introducing different concepts, right? But you can really pare it down to the core principle of saving versus spending, right? Whether you need instant gratification or delayed gratification. And so you're going to start even as young as 3.
Okay.
Where it could be at home, them wanting a treat, or at the store wanting to buy something, and you framing things to them that, okay, you can have this now, but you could say, no, I don't need it right now. And you can get maybe 2 of those things next week. Have them think about that, right? And so if anyone kind of took psychology in undergrad, they would have probably come across that one study, that marshmallow study, right? Where they took, I don't know how old the kids, maybe 7, and they put them in a room all by themselves and a table, and they placed a marshmallow in front of them. And then they told the children that I'm going to leave the room. I don't know how long it was for, maybe a minute. If you eat that marshmallow, that's all you're going to get. You're done. If you refrain from eating the marshmallow, I'm going to give you another marshmallow. And that will continue. And, some children ate the marshmallow right away, right? Like they ignored it. They couldn't deal with it, right? And some kids piled up marshmallows, right? So
it's amazing to see how your own kids can differ doing that experiment.
Yes. So for instance, I do have twins. They just turned 9.
Okay.
And this has been pretty prevalent throughout their childhood, where the one twin is a saver, right? And the other is the complete opposite. So we actually introduced bank accounts for them, which you can get into as you get in that 7, 8, 9 age, right? I think it's important to give them that. They're going to start to get birthday money and different things, chore money, perhaps. Then you can start to amp up that decision from the candy in the store to now being, you can put that money in the bank and save it, or possibly even invest it, or you can spend it. And so my son has accumulated quite a bit of money, and he gets a lot of gratification from it. Like he likes to see how much he has, and he saves everything. Whereas my daughter is not as interested and fine to go to the store and buy a toy or buy some clothes. And I think it's a good indication early to see where your children are and maybe help provide guidance to possibly save more. I think would be quite helpful.
You said so many things that I love there, because you mentioned the bank accounts. Our kids have bank accounts, but they're not something that we talk about. We get money and we just put the money in their bank account, but it's just kind of like this thing that's away that they never see. They don't know how much money is in there, and money never comes out of it. So they don't know that part. So should I be letting my kids take money out of the bank account? If, let's just say it is birthday money, they get Chinese New Year money, it just automatically goes in there. I guess we should now be implementing some sort of lesson here, or a practice, so that we're talking about it and including them in the process versus just putting it all in the bank account. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think at a certain point, and you think they can handle that, but I think introducing responsibility and independence is important, right? We all probably know people that in their lives were not given it. Everything was there, right, for them. Like it was fine. Like they knew they were being taken care of. They weren't given a lot of big decision-making power as a, child, teenager, and then they become an adult, and maybe they're not as well equipped compared to the child that was forced to be making decisions and, was getting allowance, had, a job and was saving and spending and didn't just get everything that they needed handed to them.
Okay.
Right?
I get the practice of having them included in putting their money into the bank account and maybe determining what percentage they will put into the bank account or save or allow for spending. But are you saying I should also allow the kids to take money out of the bank account?
I think at some point that's valuable.
Okay.
Right? They may not make the best decisions out of the gate, and that's okay, because they'll learn the natural consequence of if their sibling all of a sudden has more money in the bank and is talking about that. So I think that's worthwhile to provide that independence. I think children are capable of more than we think. And I think you kind of hold them back if you kind of shelter them too much from those decisions. So another element is just understanding the value of money, right? If it's just your parent tapping a card every time they want something, is that value really getting in there for them? What this means, the hard work your parent, put into saving and earning that income, right? That you provide. And that's a valuable lesson. So if it's a highly discretionary purchase, like randomly at a store for something else, and they really want to buy this thing, and they just had their birthday, and it's like, no, you don't need that thing. And you can be like, okay, sure. Like if you want it, I have your bank card, you can pay for it.
Okay.
Right. my son, for instance, that this comes up quite a bit, all of a sudden, no, actually, he doesn't need it that much. He doesn't need it that much,
Yeah.
right?
Second guessing himself now
Right.
because it might be coming
So
out
he's
of
like,
his pocket.
okay. And
Okay.
those little mental back and forth for children, I think, are very helpful to be having through their childhood. And it evolves from there. You get into, teenage years, and then you start layering on the concept of investing. But I already talked with my 9-year-olds about the concept of investing.
Okay.
Just basic ideas of compounding and returns. And even, a great spot is their RESPs, right? At some point you can tell her that you have we're saving for your education.
Okay.
And we invest that. Okay. Well, what does investing mean, right? A good way to do it, maybe it's not everything, but you can have some individual stocks in there, right? That they might understand, or it might be more relatable for them. So in my kids' RESP, they might hold, some Dollarama stock.
Okay.
Okay. So you're an investor in Dollarama. Well, what does that mean, an investor? Well, it means you own a very, very small part of that company. So when you go purchase from something there, they earn money, and that profit is attributable to shareholders like you. And so
I love that.
Just starting to get there. I mean, it's not going to click totally, but they start to get it. And my son really latched onto it.
Okay.
Like, I want my own investment account, even aside from the RSP. I want to put all my savings in there. And just the idea that foregoing that instant gratification, that purchase, and saving can pay a lot of dividends in the future through earning a return, compounding those returns over time, which is a very powerful force, right?
I love how you're bringing your kids into the conversation, because these are conversations, well, minimally, that Alex and I are having, but we certainly don't have these conversations with the kids. It's a separate conversation. And when they aren't around, it didn't occur to me to really bring them into it. But you're right. It should just be a part of the everyday conversation so that they don't turn a certain age and then suddenly start learning about money. It's as they age, they're learning more and more about money and how to handle it and how to save. A few minutes ago, you mentioned something that I want to go back to. You mentioned chore money. I'd love to talk about, what you think about chore money. Obviously, that's something that you do in your household, but I think that it almost seems like that's something that's controversial amongst different parents. Some people believe in chore money, others don't. I'd love to hear your philosophy there.
So at home, we introduced the chore chart, and there is a monetary reward based on how many stars they accumulate through the week. And we have different items that they can get stars for, which are customized by each kid and what we think they need to work on, whether it's, cleaning the room, unpacking their bag and lunch after school, and that sort of thing. So,
and I imagine it varies by age.
And it'll vary by age.
Okay.
Right. And hopefully, and it will evolve and change as your child gets older and the bar gets higher. Right.
Okay.
So we've had a lot of success with it. The kids really, our kids, maybe not all kids will, our kids have really gravitated towards it. It does incent the right behavior, and it is a source of saving. And it's just bringing in, again, that concept of doing the right thing, helping around the house, providing, putting effort in, and getting something in return. And then you make that decision now. So you get that $5 in return. What are you doing with it? Are you putting it in your bank account, or are you going to go buy a trinket that you're not going to play with next week?
Yeah.
And you do that over and over each week. And hopefully it's providing a bit of a framework for them in their minds of how things work, which I think is a real positive thing.
Yeah. We've had a lot of success doing that as well. And it really helps. Whether people agree or not, it does help to reinforce certain behavior.
Yeah. And another thing I think to touch on is that there is a carrot and stick element to it, right? So we do take away stars for behavior, and we've outlined in detail what those behaviors are, so they know when they do them, that they will lose a star. And unfortunately, they continue to lose a lot of stars through the week.
I feel like we'll have to do a podcast episode in the future solely on this system and how families can incorporate this system in their household.
Absolutely.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Adam, we've just scratched the surface here, really, but I feel like we have covered so many wonderful things regarding finances. If there is one small takeaway you can share with listeners about how they can take control of their finances, what would you suggest?
I think it's a big takeaway. And I think it's more of just taking action, right? Taking that step. The status quo is always easier, right? In life, with anything, it's the same with financial planning. It's always easier to do nothing, right? But that's rarely the optimal path, right? Inertia is very strong. So it's taking stock of your situation and figuring out where can steps be taken. Are you currently working with someone that maybe it's not the best fit? Talk to other people, right? Do some research. Maybe there is a better fit out there for your family. If you're not working with someone, talk with your spouse. Maybe you should be. Maybe that would be valuable and take that step. Are you speaking openly? Are you talking with your kids, thinking about how your kids are thinking about financial concepts, topics? Think about how you could introduce those in baby steps, but it's just doing something, right? And I think that's the big takeaway.
I have a lot to do. Adam, thank you so much for coming. It's been wonderful learning about these concepts, and I definitely am going to start incorporating them within my own household. For anyone who wants to get in touch with Adam, check out his information below. And if you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe, and see you for the next episode.